Savannah is drenched in rain, cloaked by Spanish moss, but inside the Savannah Relic Restoration, a cold-blooded nightmare is playing out. 7-year-old Leo Sterling is held captive by the woman who promised him safety, a predator with a perfect smile and a sinister secret hidden in a soundproof room. Tonight, K-9 Officer Eli Vance and his German Shepherd partner, Kaiser, must break down the walls of deception. The shocking truth: Leo was being used to train the very animals he was conditioned to fear. Join us as we follow the silent German Shepherd, who found the hidden clue that cracked a murder case and gave one brave boy a second chance. If you believe in quiet miracles and that justice always finds a way, hit subscribe now and tell us where you're watching from in the comments. Savannah, Georgia, held its breath in the deep, humid stillness of a late autumn morning, a time when the city's inherent melancholy deepened under the weight of history. Spanish moss, thick as old velvet, clung to the ancient oak branches, creating an atmosphere both enchanting and profoundly secretive. Along a side street where the cobblestones were cracked and uneven, lay a large, sprawling structure that had seen countless eras come and go. It was home to the Savannah Relic Restoration, a business specializing in the painstaking preservation of antique furniture and textiles. The front showroom offered an ornate illusion of tranquility, but the large, low-slung workshop tucked away in the back alley was a different world entirely, a concrete box currently pushing a sharp, chemical haze out into the morning's moisture. On the second floor, directly above the workshop, lived Lena Chavez, a woman who understood the language of silence and threat better than most. Lena, in her late 40s, was petite and angular, her salt and pepper hair tightly contained in a severe bun. She wore the faint, permanent lines of fatigue around her mouth and eyes, the quiet scars of a past life as a relentless investigative journalist. She had sought out this seemingly peaceful pocket of Savannah specifically to find respite, but this morning, the low hum of her transcription work was pierced by a sound too familiar and too horrifying to ignore, a child's weak, forced plea. It was muffled by the thick flooring, but the message carried with terrifying clarity. "I'll be good. Just please. Don't use the steam." Lena snatched the phone, the ingrained reflexes of her former career overriding any hesitation. She didn't need to ask questions. She knew the sound of structured fear. She delivered the information to the dispatcher with the calm, clipped efficiency of a professional. "There's a child in danger. The Savannah Relic Restoration. The workshop in the back. I hear sounds of distress, possible abuse." The patrol car slid silently to a stop 2 blocks away. Officer Eli Vance, a man whose quiet intensity was often mistaken for detachment, stepped out. Eli, 37, was built lean and tall, his movements carrying the economical discipline of 12 years of service, 4 of those spent in the Marine Corps. His face was angular, clean-shaven, accented by a subtle silver-white scar above his left brow, a memory from a hard deployment that had taught him the immense value of silence and observation. Eli was wearing a neat, faded navy uniform, and his gray-blue eyes, always steady, seemed perpetually fixed on details others overlooked. This quiet intensity was the perfect foil for his partner. Filling the space beside him was Kaiser, a 4-year-old German Shepherd, K-9, a massive, goreful dog with the broad chest and muscular shoulders of a true working animal. Kaiser's coat was a striking black and tan, and his intelligent amber eyes were currently focused and unblinking. He was not a pet, but a finely calibrated instrument of detection. Trained to read tension in scent and sound, Kaiser was often calmer than the humans he protected. He rested his heavy muzzle on the center console, but when the dispatcher's voice mentioned child distress, his large ears instantly swiveled forward, filtering the air with a unique chemical signature of human fear. "We go, partner," Eli murmured, clipping the lead to Kaiser's vest. Kaiser didn't need a command. He sensed the shift in Eli's breathing. They moved quickly, leaving the pleasant facade of the antique showroom behind, and plunging into the narrow, damp alleyway. Here, the charming Savannah of the tourist brochures vanished. The brick walls were dark with mildew and overshadowed by the weeping Spanish moss. The air changed, becoming a thick, layered puzzle of industrial smells. Eli pulled down his mask to confirm the odor Kaiser was actively hunting. There was the expected scent of the trade, the sweet, dizzying fume of varnish, the sharp, biting smell of wood stripper, and the dry tang of specialized adhesives. but Kaiser was pulling persistently toward the ventilation unit of the heavy corrugated metal workshop door. The dog gave a low, rumbling whine, a sound of confusion and concern, as he processed something beneath the layers of industrial chemicals. Cutting through the wood restoratives was a metallic, aggressive trace of mild acid, an odor that was dangerously out of place and lingering in the air like a corrosive threat. Eli radioed in. Unit 49 entering the rear workshop. Unidentified chemical traces detected. Proceeding with caution. He signaled Kaiser to hold and drew his weapon. The thick steel door was slightly ajar, yielding to a light push. The workshop was large and stiflingly humid, the air thick with steam rising from a heavy industrial press used for fabric and upholstery restoration. The room was chaotic, filled with half-finished projects, rolls of expensive brittle velvet, and specialized tools. The scene unfolding within was a carefully constructed tableau of dominance. Standing central was Vivi Thorne, the proprietor and the child's legal guardian. She was an arresting, almost predatory figure, impeccably dressed in dark, structured slacks and a custom silk shirt. Her auburn hair, polished and severe, was tightly constrained in a high ponytail, emphasizing the sharp, calculated angles of her face. At 35, her beauty was the kind that demanded attention and respect, marked by lines of perpetual control rather than human warmth. She radiated an unnerving stillness, her pale eyes fixed on the small figure at her feet. In her right hand, Vivi held a large, professional-grade steam iron used for smoothing upholstery. The iron had been placed down, but the heavy chrome plate still shimmered faintly, heat rising from it like a distorting haze. Cowering beneath her, pressed against the cold metal of a shelving unit lined with cans of wood stain, was Leo Sterling, the 7-year-old victim. Leo was painfully thin, his damp cotton shirt clinging to his back, revealing the cruel, angry red marks of fresh burns and faded scars across his upper back and shoulders. His dark hair was slicked with sweat, and his glassy brown eyes were wide with a consuming, silent terror. "Police, drop the iron now!" Eli's voice was sharp, cutting through the low hum of the machinery. Vivi turned with a studied, practiced slowness, her expression shifting instantly into a mask of startled, defensive innocence. She raised her perfectly manicured hands slightly. "Officer, I assure you, this is a terrible misunderstanding. He was being careless near the steam press. I told him not to touch my equipment." Eli ignored the lie, his focus laser-locked on the boy. As Eli moved to secure the area, signaling Kaiser to remain, the truth of the situation crystallized with stunning clarity. Leo was trembling, his small frame vibrating with fear, but his eyes barely registered Vivi or the menacing iron. Instead, his entire gaze was riveted, locked in a primal, paralyzing state of shock, on the large, silent German shepherd K-9 standing motionless by Eli's knee. The terror wasn't directed at the burns, the woman, or the iron. The boy was afraid of the dog. The observation sent a chill colder than the humid air through Eli. He knew instinctually that the abuse wasn't random, it was systematic, and the iron was merely a tool of enforcement. He cautiously lowered his weapon, shielding the boy from Vivi's watchful intensity. "It's okay, buddy," Eli said, his voice dropping to a gentle whisper. "You're safe now. We're here to help you." The case had just become infinitely more complicated. The oppressive heat and chemical-laced steam of the Savannah Relic Restoration workshop seemed to thicken around Eli Vance, turning the air viscous and difficult to breathe. Leo Sterling, still paralyzed by the sight of Kaiser, had finally been gently maneuvered into Eli's arms, a process that required Eli to physically turn his K-9 partner toward the wall, blocking the dog from the boy's line of sight. Vivi Thorne, recovering from the shock of the police entry, was now in full control of her narrative. She stood with her arms crossed, the picture of aggrieved sophistication. "Officer, I have cooperated fully. I am the legal guardian of my stepson, and I assure you, those marks are old. He got them weeks ago, being reckless with the wood solvent in the back. Boys are dramatic," she stated, her voice as polished and hard as the varnish on the antique furniture in the next room. "If you intend to hold me, you will need to provide legitimate grounds. This is slander, and it is interrupting my business." Eli did not engage. He held the trembling Leo close, his attention fixed on securing the immediate physical evidence. He could feel the small, fragile bones of the boy's back through his shirt, and the heat radiating from the burns. As he crouched, keeping his head low, his gaze swept across the grimy concrete floor near the workshop's drain, the area where the steam and chemical runoff collected. There, half concealed by a fine layer of dust and wood shavings, he spotted something anomalous. It was a small, heavy padlock, old and clearly rusted, the steel latch scratched deeply as if it had been forced or struggled against repeatedly. It was out of place, lacking any key, and bearing no obvious connection to the expensive antique restoration work surrounding it. Eli carefully took a picture with his departmental phone, noting its coordinates relative to the drain. This lock wasn't about securing a shed, it was about restriction. "Dispatch, I need EMS and Child Protective Services immediately," Eli called into his radio, his voice low and firm. He added a critical detail. "Request Detective Reynolds to roll on a suspected aggravated child abuse case, Unit 49. Moments later, the heavy outer door burst open and help arrived. The first was Dr. Maya Hansen, the lead paramedic, a woman in her early 40s with short, no-nonsense dark hair and a weary but competent expression. She approached Leo with practiced gentleness, her movements quiet and her voice a calm antidote to the room's tension. Maya had seen too many accidents and too many willful cruelties, and the sight of Leo's burns, combined with the sterile malice emanating from Vivi, tightened her jaw instantly. Behind her came Detective Grant Reynolds, the man Eli had requested. Reynolds was a seasoned veteran in his late 50s, a heavy-set man whose broad shoulders seemed permanently stooped from carrying the weight of the city's worst failures. His hair was thinning, gray, and his face, etched with deep lines of fatigue and cynicism, was framed by a perpetually unkempt salt-and-pepper mustache. Reynolds was known for his gravelly voice and his almost supernatural ability to spot a lie. He carried an air of quiet, non-confrontational authority, the kind that made suspects crumble out of sheer exhaustion. Reynolds took one look at Vivi, her controlled posture and polished facade, and then at Leo's trembling form. He simply nodded to Eli. "I see it, Vance. We'll handle the paperwork. Get the boy stable." While Dr. Hansen assessed Leo's wounds, whispering assurances that were likely the first kind words the boy had heard in months, Reynolds began speaking to Vivi with a low, monotonous calm, gathering her official statement and creating the paper trail that would lead to her detention. Eli stepped back, handing Leo over to the care of Dr. Hansen, who immediately began applying cooling compresses to the worst of the burns. Kaiser, sensing the shift in the emotional atmosphere, moved from the corner and settled silently at Eli's heel, his amber eyes fixed on the entrance, guarding the perimeter. Using the moment of distraction, Eli pulled up his secure laptop in the patrol car. He needed to find out who Vivi Thorne really was. The background check confirmed the basic facts Eli already knew. Vivian Thorne was the recently married wife of Evan Sterling, a long-haul truck driver who was almost perpetually on the road, hauling cargo across the continental U.S. Evan was a good man, Eli knew from local records, hard-working but utterly absent. But the real shock lay buried deep in the system, sealed away and barely accessible. Eli bypassed the standard filters and found it. An archived, highly restricted file from the Fulton County Child Protective Services, dated 5 years ago. The file detailed the suspicious death of another foster child under Vivi Thorne's care, a 3-year-old girl named Daisy, whose death was ultimately ruled an accidental drowning. The report noted multiple bruises and unexplained injuries dismissed by Vivi as clumsiness. The case was sealed quickly after a lack of hard evidence, and Vivi's swift relocation to Savannah to pursue her business. The coincidence of another child suffering severe injury under her roof was no longer a coincidence. It was a deadly pattern. The knowledge sent a cold spike of certainty through Eli. This woman was not just an abuser, she was a predator, skilled in the art of disappearance and denial. As Leo was being gently secured onto the gurney for transport, still visibly terrified but silently compliant, Eli knelt beside him one last time. "You're going to the hospital, Leo. They're going to help you." Leo didn't speak, his eyes darting fearfully to where Kaiser sat. But as Eli helped adjust the collar of his damp, sweat-stained shirt, Eli felt a small, unusual lump of folded fabric. He carefully pulled it out, a piece of heavy cotton sewn into the inside lining of the shirt, almost like a desperate pocket. Inside was a crudely drawn, vivid picture made with crayon. It showed a figure, small, frail, and stick-like, cowering in the corner of a dark, barred room. And guarding the exit, drawn with aggressive, jagged lines and oversized teeth, was a fierce, snarling dog, its massive chain anchored to the wall. Leo hadn't just been afraid of Kaiser. He had been living in a constant state of terror, meticulously trained by an animal far more dangerous than the police K-9. The padlock on the floor, the aggressive acid odor, the sealed file, and now the drawing, all clicked into a terrifying mosaic. Eli slipped the disc drawing into an evidence bag. This was not about restoration, it was about weaponization. The fluorescent lights of the Savannah precinct felt abrasive after the humid darkness of the restoration workshop. Eli Vance sat across a metal desk from Detective Grant Reynolds, the small, crudely drawn picture of the caged boy and the vicious dog laid out between them like a map to hell. Reynolds, his heavy frame leaning back in the chair, pushed his perpetually unkempt mustache up with a tired sigh. "This drawing, Vance, it's too detailed to be fantasy. A kid doesn't invent that kind of terror out of nowhere. It suggests systemic desensitization." He paused, tapping a thick finger on the sealed Fulton County file summary. "And this Thorne woman. A kid dies under her care 5 years ago, ruled accidental drowning, but with a laundry list of prior bruises. Now this. It's a signature, not a coincidence." Eli agreed, running a hand over Kaiser's thick, resting coat. The German shepherd lay silently under the desk, a heavy, warm presence, the very image of controlled fear that had terrified Leo into silence. The fear detective. Leo was more scared of Kaiser than he was of the iron, and the trace of mild acid odor Kaiser picked up, it doesn't fit furniture restoration. It feels like disinfection, sanitizing something big. Before Reynolds could respond, the precinct phone rang. The desk sergeant patched the call through directly to Eli's secure line. "Officer Vance, my name is Marisa Diaz," a woman's voice whispered, tight with barely contained panic. "I saw the news alerts. I used to work at the Relic Restoration. I quit 3 months ago. You need to listen to me." Marissa was in her mid-30s, a petite woman of Latina descent with large dark eyes that seemed to hold chronic anxiety. Her black hair was pulled back into a hasty, messy ponytail, and her clothing, practical jeans and a faded work shirt, indicated a life built on long hours and hard labor. Her fear was palpable, but beneath it, Eli heard the tremor of a righteous conscience finally winning a long internal war. Vivi had been ruthless with her employees, Marissa explained, cutting hours and threatening undocumented workers, creating a culture of silence that had kept her secrets safe. Vivi kept a room, a big one, in the back workshop area. It was sealed with heavy metal plating, soundproofed. She called it her private project room, where she kept special inventory, Marissa explained, her voice dropping. "But I never saw any antiques go in or out, only big crates delivered after midnight, and they always smelled like something raw, metal and sweat. She forbade anyone from going near it, especially after hours." The description of the soundproof room immediately harmonized the scattered notes Eli and Reynolds had accumulated. The acid smell, the abused child terrified of dogs, the suspicious death file. Vivi wasn't just restoring antiques. She was running a high-value, high-risk operation. "Can you describe its location?" Eli asked, his voice calm, encouraging her to keep talking. "It's in the dark corner of the main workshop, near the loading dock, but it opens only to the alley," Marissa instructed. "There's a small, heavy metal door with a reinforced frame, painted to match the rest of the brick, under the thickest Spanish moss. It's usually sealed from the outside with a heavy-duty latch, the kind you'd use for a warehouse." The word latch hit Eli with the force of an electric shock, instantly connecting to the rusted padlock he had photographed by the drain in Chapter 2. The padlock wasn't for the front door, it was for the back door of a secret room. By the time the call ended, Reynolds was already on his feet, his worn trench coat draped over his broad shoulders. "That's enough for a secondary, specific search warrant, Vance. You got the location, I'll get the judge. We're going back in." Less than 2 hours later, Eli, Reynolds, and a small uniformed team returned to the shadowy, moss-draped alley beside the Savannah Relic Restoration. The sun, filtered through the thick canopy of oak trees, cast the alley in perpetual twilight. The air was heavy, but the previous chemical smell had dissipated, replaced by the damp, earthy odor of the historic city. Eli approached the rear of the building, following Marissa's directions. Kaiser, now wearing his active tracking vest, moved ahead, nose low to the ground. The dog was different, Noel. The calm composure he displayed in Chapter 2 was gone, replaced by a focused physical agitation. His tail was straight, his muscles coiled, and a low guttural vibration emanated from his chest. Not a bark, but a threatening primal warning. Kaiser didn't stop until he reached a particular spot, a heavy, unremarkable metal door, partially obscured by the drooping, wet ropes of Spanish moss. The door was flush with the brick wall, painted dark green to camouflage its presence, and held shut by a massive industrial steel latch. The dog went ballistic. It wasn't the frantic excitement of a find, but a violent, territorial rage. Kaiser threw his full weight against the door, his teeth bared in a silent, terrifying snarl, the sound vibrating through Eli's chest via the leash. He was reacting to something inside the room with intense hostility, a hostility usually reserved for immediate, direct threats to his handler or an innocent party. "Hold him, Vance! What's he hitting?" Reynolds commanded, his hand instinctively going to his weapon, surprised by the intensity of the K-9's reaction. "He's not hitting a smell detective," Eli grunted, struggling slightly to maintain control of the powerful dog. "He's hitting a presence, something hostile, something trained." Reynolds, without waiting for the full forensic team, pulled a pry bar from the trunk of his unmarked cruiser. The warrant covers forced entry when the integrity of the evidence is at stake. This meets the criteria. With a terrible shriek of straining metal that echoed deafeningly, in the quiet alley, the heavy steel latch was ripped from its moorings. Reynolds kicked the door open, drawing his weapon and plunging into the blackness within, Eli and Kaiser right behind him. The room was vast, rectangular, and utterly cold, designed specifically to be soundproof, confirming Marissa's testimony. The air inside was dead, stale, and unnaturally dry, but the most pressing sensation was the lingering, metallic, gamey smell of uncured animal waste and fear. Eli activated the tactical light on his helmet. The beam swept across the horrifying findings. The center of the concrete floor was dominated by a large, reinforced kennel, constructed not of light wire, but of thick, welded steel bars. The kennel was empty, but its base was stained with dark, dried patches that were undeniably blood. Scattered around the perimeter were tattered, heavy blankets that had been ripped to shreds, not by playful tearing, but by violent, desperate clawing. Near the back wall, Eli saw heavy-gauge chains bolted into the floor. As the light beam hit the far corner, Eli froze. He could see unmistakable evidence of recent cleanup, a smear of dark, arterial-looking fluid that the mild acid bath had failed to erase completely, and beside it, half dissolved by the chemicals, a few loose, coarse strands of animal hair, thick, black, and far too large to belong to any common house pet. "This isn't an antique storage room," Reynolds muttered, his gravelly voice dropping to a shocked whisper. "This is a fighting pit, or a breeding ground." Eli looked from the steel kennel to the dried blood, and then back to Kaiser, who was standing perfectly still now, his rage replaced by a silent, grim understanding. Eli thought of the rusted padlock, the dog drawing, and the boy who was more afraid of Kaiser than of fire. The missing piece of the puzzle was finally in place. Leo wasn't just being abused by a cold stepmother, he was a silent witness, and potentially a participant in an illegal animal operation, one that had likely been protected by fear and violence. The sterile white light of the forensics team's lamps was a brutal invasion of the dark, soundproof room, stripping away the mystery and exposing the sheer, cold horror of the space. The air inside was dead, clinging to the metallic smell of uncured animal waste and the residual sharpness of fear. Eli Vance stood shoulder to shoulder with Detective Grant Reynolds, watching the methodical process unfold. Dr. Celine Voss, the lead forensic technician, moved with the quiet, focused intensity of a surgeon. She was a woman in her late 30s, tall and slender, her dark hair pulled back severely under a disposable cap. Celine's demeanor was entirely clinical, a necessity born from years spent documenting the worst aspects of human nature. Her face, sharp and intelligent, remained impassive as she cataloged the gruesome findings, treating the scene not with emotion, but with the dispassionate rigor of geometry and chemistry. "This space was designed to contain, not to store antiques," Celine stated, her voice dry and technical, echoing slightly in the bare room. "The walls are packed with acoustic foam and reinforced steel plating. The acid Eli detected was likely a crude attempt at neutralizing biological matter, a high-concentration disinfectant, not a wood solvent. Celine pointed her light to the center of the floor, dominated by the heavy-gauge steel kennel Eli and Reynolds had found. We've lifted prints here, but observe the floor itself. The concrete showed distinct discoloration. Not normal wear, these are patterns consistent with repeated heavy wear from large, confined animals. And look at the bolting pattern. Eli and Reynolds leaned closer. The floor had been bolted several times, the concrete slightly fractured around the mounting points. Near the back wall, a single, terrifying element remained, a thick, heavy chain, anchored into the floor and with a bolt designed to withstand massive force. The chain showed signs of extreme tension and metallic wear. The blankets were torn by muscle and teeth, not by playful tearing, Reynolds observed, his voice a low growl of disgust. They were struggling. Precisely, Celine confirmed, bagging a segment of the chain. But there's something else. She moved to a high shelf that Vivi had clearly failed to reach during her hurried cleanup. Using a sterile brush and a collection tray, Celine carefully swept up a small accumulation of fine, white-gray powder. The dust was almost imperceptible against the concrete shelf, but its presence immediately elevated the case from mere abuse to organized crime. This is consistent with an equine or large animal anesthetic, primarily ketamine derivatives, Celine announced, carefully sealing the sample. It's used illegally to transport large, uncooperative animals, or, in this context, to subdue them for medical care or transport without detection. This confirms a high-value, organized illegal animal operation. The realization hit Eli with chilling clarity, tying the acid, the chains, and the missing animals together. Vivi was a smuggler, likely dealing in high-risk, expensive fighting or tracking dogs. The restoration business was merely a sophisticated, soundproof hub, but the question remained, where did Leo fit in? Celine's light beam tracked across the floor to the corner where the heaviest bloodstains were concentrated. We have lifted 3 distinct DNA profiles from this area, she reported, examining a sealed swab. One is definitively K-9, a large breed, aggressive genetics. The second is an unknown human male profile. The third is a mixture, but the concentration suggests a serious arterial bleed, likely from the animal, possibly combined with the human blood. Reynolds stared at the empty space where the animal had been chained. Unknown human male, not Vivi, not Leo. Correct. The blood is mixed in the dried patches of animal waste. We're working on the identification, but the most alarming discovery relates directly to the victim. Celine paused, looking directly at Eli. The mild acid traces you reported, Officer Vance, we found traces of it, highly diluted, on the heavy gauge chains and the steel kennel bars. But we also found faint, almost residual traces of that same chemical on the synthetic padding of the old steam iron you seized. Eli felt a knot tighten in his gut. She was using the chemical in the abuse, not just the iron. Worse, Celine corrected, her clinical tone unwavering. We found microscopic burns on the synthetic padding of the kennel base. They are deliberately spaced and shaped. Now, consider Leo's phobia. The boy wasn't just being burned, he was being systematically conditioned. The iron and the acid were the punishments, used to enforce compliance and silence during the training sessions with the attack dogs. The full, horrifying picture snapped into place. Vivi was conditioning high-value fighting or tracking dogs for sale, but she needed to ensure they were absolutely aggressive and dominant. Leo, small, helpless, and completely alone, was the perfect, terrifyingly controlled guinea pig. He wasn't just a child being abused, he was a living, breathing component in her business model, used for desensitization training. A systematic process where the child was subjected to the dogs to reinforce the animal's dominance and aggression, enforced by the searing pain of the steam iron or the chemical burn when he failed to comply or cried out. Eli looked at the empty room, suddenly seeing the invisible shadow of a chained, snarling beast and a small boy cowering, not daring to make a sound. The fear of Kaiser was not random. It was a profound, systematic trauma. Leo had been taught that all dogs, especially the large, powerful ones, meant pain and terror. She turned the child into a training prop, Eli muttered, his anger a cold, hard stone in his chest. We believe so, Reynolds confirmed grimly. The abuse was designed to maintain silence and ensure compliance, both for Leo and for the safety of her inventory. If the boy cried or spoke, he risked exposing the operation. She taught him silence was survival. Eli turned to Celine. The animal hair, Can you identify the breed? We are fast-tracking the analysis, but preliminarily, we are looking at a powerful breed, Rottweiler or perhaps a specialized Mastiff cross. These aren't family pets, Officer Vance. They were bred to fight or protect high-value assets. We're dealing with more than just a stepmother here. We're dealing with a syndicate. The fact that the animal and the unknown human are gone means she had help, and they got a serious warning. As Celine bagged the last piece of evidence, a small synthetic patch from the kennel that contained traces of blood and the anesthetic powder, Eli realized the magnitude of Vivi's network. She was high risk, well-connected, and now fully alerted. Vivi had cleaned house quickly, leaving only the soundproof walls and the horrifying proof of Leo's systemic torture. The next step wasn't about finding the iron, it was about tracing the dogs, the unknown man, and the source of the high-grade anesthetic. The investigation was leaving the safe confines of Savannah's domestic violence cases and heading straight into the dark world of organized crimes. The air in the Savannah precinct was thick with the scent of bad coffee and latent violence. Eli Vance and Detective Grant Reynolds were reviewing the preliminary forensics report from Dr. Celine Voss. The discovery of the large animal anesthetic and the mixed DNA profiles had shifted the case from aggravated domestic abuse to a federal investigation involving trafficking and organized crime. Vivi Thorne was currently being held on multiple charges, but the clock was ticking to locate her accomplice and the dangerous animals. The front desk intercom buzzed, interrupting their grim silence. "Detective Reynolds, we have an Evan Sterling here. He's insisting on seeing his wife." Reynolds shared a look with Eli. "Perfect. The cavalry has arrived, right on cue." Evan Sterling walked into the interrogation room, looking like a man who had driven 4,000 miles without sleeping. In his early 40s, he was stocky, built solid from years of manual labor, but the permanent sun-darkened tan on his arms and neck contrasted sharply with the sickly pale skin around his eyes. He wore worn denim jeans and a heavy flannel shirt, his face etched with the deep, tired lines of a long-haul trucker. His hands, thick and scarred, fidgeted nervously, repeatedly rubbing the bare space on his left ring finger, where a wedding band should have been. The grief and bewilderment in his eyes were genuine, but underneath it, Eli could detect a desperate, rigid loyalty to Vivi. "She called me," Evan began immediately, his voice loud and defensive, already set to battle. "She said this was a mistake, a complete misunderstanding about some antiques. My wife is under a lot of stress running that place alone. With me gone all the time, she would never hurt Leo." Reynolds leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table, his eyes steady on Evan's tired face. "Mr. Sterling, your son, Leo, is hospitalized with multiple second-degree burns. We have forensic proof your wife was using a steam iron and a chemical disinfectant to systemically torture that boy. This is not stress. This is cruelty." Evan flinched, but his denial was fierce. "Vivi told me the first time was an accident. He falls down a lot. Boys are rough. You don't know my wife. She's strict, yes, she believes in discipline, but she has a huge heart." Eli slid the crude crayon drawing, the caged boy, the snarling dog, the heavy chain, across the table toward Evan. "She has a huge heart, Mr. Sterling. Then what is this? And why did your wife run a highly sophisticated soundproof animal smuggling operation out of the back of her antique shop?" The drawing hit Evan hard. His face crumbled, but he still clung to his denial. "Leo draws nightmares, officer. He misses his mother. And the back room, that's for antique upholstery and fabric cleaning. That's her business." Reynolds let the moment linger before dropping the second bomb, the sealed file summary. 5 years ago, Mr. Sterling, a 3-year-old girl died while in Vivi Thorne's care, ruled accidental drowning. Now, another child under her care is suffering aggravated assault. That is not bad luck, Evan. That is a documented pattern of lethal behavior. The mention of the previous death finally broke Evan's forced composure. He covered his face with his hands, his broad shoulders shaking with silent, guilty sobs. "I didn't know," he choked out. "I swear I didn't know about that other kid. She told me she had to leave Fulton County because of a bad business deal." "You only know what Vivi allowed you to know," Eli said, his voice flat and unforgiving. He stood up, towering over the defeated man. "We're done talking here, Evan. If you want to believe this is a misunderstanding, I need to show you the reality. I need you to see what she protected. Come with me." The drive back to the Savannah Relic Restoration was silent and tense. The building was still sealed, the Spanish moss seeming to hang heavier, concealing the horror within. Eli led Evan directly to the rear workshop, past the silent steam press and the stacks of velvet, stopping at the now-wrecked metal door of the soundproof room. Eli activated his helmet light, focusing the beam on the center of the cold concrete floor. The silence in the soundproof room was absolute, magnifying the horror of the scene. He gestured to the empty, reinforced steel kennel, the chains bolted into the floor, and the dark, dried patches of blood. Evan stared, swaying slightly on his feet. The sheer physical evidence of the prison and the violence, the shredded blankets, the raw, lingering metallic scent, was overwhelming. He sank to his knees, his hands resting near the base of the kennel, where the animal's blood and the anesthetic powder had been found. Leo was kept in here, Eli stated, his voice low but cutting. He wasn't an upholstery apprentice. He was a training dummy. She used him to condition fighting dogs, and she used the iron to make sure he never screamed loud enough to expose her business. This is where he was beaten, Evan. This is where he learned to fear any dog that looked like Kaiser. Evan collapsed fully onto the floor, his denial finally shattered by the cold reality of the steel chains. His voice, when it came, was a broken whisper, thick with guilt and despair. It wasn't an accident, Evan confessed, his eyes wide and vacant. Not Clara, not the car accident. I always knew. Eli and Reynolds exchanged a quick, charged glance. Clara was Leo's birth mother, who had died in a single car accident months before Vivi married Evan. The police had ruled it road conditions and driver fatigue. What wasn't an accident, Evan? Reynolds pressed, leaning down, his voice betraying a hint of urgency. Clara? She knew about the dogs, Evan admitted, rubbing the space on his ring finger again, a nervous habit that spoke of a deep, buried secret. She heard them, late at night. She found the crates in the alley once. She confronted Vivi, right before I left on that last long haul. She told Vivi she was going to the police and expose everything. The dogs, the buying, the selling, the dirty business. Tears streamed down Evan's face, mixing with the dust of the soundproof room. Vivi told me Clara was unstable, that she was hallucinating because of her depression. I believed her. When Clara died, I was devastated. Vivi was there, so calm, so comforting. She manipulated me. She had the custody papers ready 3 days after the funeral. I just signed. I was broken. I never guessed she was protecting herself, protecting this. Eli looked from the desolate steel kennel to the wrecked man on the floor. Vivi Thorne had orchestrated Clara's death to secure her silence and access to her real business, the soundproof room. Leo was simply the only remaining loose end, a witness who needed to be silenced, and a resource to be exploited. The scale of her malice was immense. The final piece of the motive was in place. Vivi's abuse wasn't just spite. It was a ruthless strategy to protect her highly lucrative and illegal trafficking operation. The weight of Evan Sterling's confession, the admission that Vivi Thorne had manipulated him into signing away Leo's protection 3 days after his wife's death, hung like a shroud over the precinct. Eli Vance, alongside Detective Grant Reynolds, was now racing against the clock. Vivi was detained, Evan was broken and isolated, but the physical evidence of Vivi's grand scheme, the attack dog, the unknown accomplice, and the full extent of the trafficking ring remained elusive. She's too smart to leave anything digital at the restoration, Reynolds grumbled, pacing the small office, his hands running repeatedly over his tired mustache. And Evan's denial was absolute until we broke him with the kennel. He saw nothing. He signed everything. Eli was systematically sifting through Leo's meager belongings, which had been brought from the Sterling home, a small duffel bag, a few threadbare clothes, and a box of worn, cheap plastic toys. Eli paused at a familiar sight, the crayon box. It was a metal tin, dented and faded, exactly the kind of small, intimate space a child might claim as his own private vault. As Eli opened the tin, the colors inside, mostly brown, black, and harsh red, mirrored the terror in Leo's drawings. But beneath the crayons, tucked into the far corner, Eli's fingers brushed against something hard and unnaturally smooth. It wasn't metal or plastic. It was a small, disguised storage drive, a USB stick, carefully wrapped in a fragment of bright yellow fabric, contrasting starkly with the dark colors of the crayons. "Bingo," Eli murmured, signaling Reynolds over. A hiding place Vivi would never look. Too insignificant. Too much a part of Leo's mind. Reynolds snatched the drive, his cynical eyes lighting up with genuine excitement. Leo wasn't just drawing his trauma, Vance. He was guarding the evidence. The encrypted drive required specific software to access. Within the hour, the precinct's tech specialist, Officer Tim Tech Collins, had managed to crack the basic encryption. Collins was a necessary fixture in the modern police force. A young man in his early 20s, slight of build, perpetually clad in a hoodie beneath his uniform vest, and possessing the pale, luminous skin of someone who rarely saw daylight. His personality was as quiet and non-confrontational as Eli's, but his eyes, magnified behind thick glasses, held a focused, almost frightening intelligence. "It's not police work, gentlemen," Collins reported, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "It looks like raw, low-resolution video files. They're heavily dated, ranging from 6 to 10 months ago." The officers dimmed the lights and gathered around the small monitor, watching the first video play. It was shaky, filmed secretly, clearly from a fixed position, obscured by shadows. The video was shot inside the soundproof workshop, confirming the location Evan had just visited. The clip showed Clara Sterling, Leo's birth mother, setting up the camera. Clara was a woman Eli had only known from a police file, a picture of a smiling, tired woman whose death had been dismissed as accidental. Here, she was tense, haggard, but fueled by a desperate resolve. The screen flickered. The scene was the same empty kennel Eli had seen in the soundproof room, but it wasn't empty now. Chained to the center bolt was a massive, powerfully built Rottweiler Mastiff cross, the same breed Celine Voss had predicted. The dog was a terrifying brute, its coat patchy and scarred, its eyes black with aggression. And standing beside it, giving sharp hand signal commands, was Vivian Thorne. Vivi was not in her sophisticated antique dealer attire here. She wore heavy work boots, dark, practical clothing, and her face was stripped bare of its civilized mask. The mask was replaced by a look of cold, calculating fury. This was the true face of the predator. The video's resolution was poor, but the sound, the chilling, low snarls of the massive dog, and the sharp, precise voice of Vivi was terrifyingly clear. Then, Vivi opened a small side door within the kennel structure and shoved Leo inside. The 7-year-old was thinner, smaller, his face blank with terror. The massive dog immediately lunged, stopped only by the thick chain holding it fast. Vivi yelled commands: "Control! Dominate! Silence!" The dog would continue to snap and snarl inches from the boy. Leo would cower, covering his head, trembling, but making no sound. When Leo flinched too violently or whimpered, Vivi would step in, not with the iron, but with a sharp prod to the dog's flanks, or a quick, brutal slap to Leo's head. Eli felt a wave of icy nausea. This was the desensitization training Celine had described, designed to condition the child into absolute silence, while simultaneously reinforcing the attack dog's predatory dominance. The physical burns were merely the consequence of breaking the silence. The video continued, a horrifying document of systemic abuse. Then, near the end of the timeline, the clip changed. Clara, now visibly distraught, was back on camera, tears streaming down her face, standing in the living room of the Sterling home. This was her final, desperate confession. "If anything happens to me," Clara whispered into the camera, her voice choked with fear, "if the car fails or I fall, I want you to know Vivi Thorne did it. She found out I was recording her. She found the first set of files, but I had this drive." Clara described how she had seen Vivi and the unknown man loading crates in the alley late one night. She had threatened to go to the police and expose the entire illegal dog trafficking operation. She said I was mentally ill, that no one would believe me over her perfect face. But I know what she's doing in that soundproof room. She's trading those dogs for massive money, and she's hurting my son to do it. If I die, Vivi is behind it. The video ended abruptly, the final, chilling frame being Clara's tear-stained face, a silent promise of justice. Silence descended over the precinct office. Eli felt his hands clench into fists, the last remnants of the accidental death ruling, vaporized by the digital evidence. Vivi Thorne had orchestrated Clara's murder to protect her business, and she used her dead best friend's son as a training accessory. "That's it," Reynolds breathed, pushing away from the monitor, his weariness replaced by a furious resolve. Aggravated assault, felony trafficking, and probable cause for first-degree murder, complicity in the trafficking of controlled substances, and conspiracy. The unknown male DNA has a name now, too. Vivi's co-conspirator. We just connected the dots between the iron, the dogs, and the death certificate. The evidence was undeniable. The final step was to use this truth to break Vivi's carefully constructed narrative in court. The Savannah County Courthouse, with its towering white columns and heavy marble halls, usually stood as a bastion of solemn justice. Today, however, the air was electric, charged with tension, as the state of Georgia prepared to present its case against Vivian Thorne. The charges were now stacked high: aggravated child abuse, felony animal trafficking, and complicity to first-degree murder for the death of Clara Sterling. The courtroom was packed, reflecting the public's morbid fascination with the beautiful antique dealer who had run a high-stakes criminal operation out of a quiet restoration shop. Vivi Thorne, dressed in a muted gray suit, sat at the defense table. Stripped of her polished wardrobe and surrounded by deputies, she still carried a chilling composure, her cold eyes defiant. The prosecution's star witness was Dr. Celine Voss, the forensic technician whose clinical, precise testimony about the ketamine derivatives, the reinforced kennel, and the systematic burn pattern served as an unshakable foundation for the state's case. Following her, Detective Grant Reynolds took the stand. Reynolds, in a rare display of uniform neatness, delivered a devastating account of Evan Sterling's confession in the soundproof room and the digital evidence recovered. The video recovered from the USB drive showed Ms. Thorne actively conditioning an attack dog, a Rottweiler Mastiff cross, to respond aggressively to Leo Sterling, Reynolds stated, his gravelly voice cutting through the courtroom silence. The purpose of the steam iron and chemical burns was simple: to enforce silence, thereby protecting the high-value inventory and the lucrative trafficking operation. The defense attorney, a sharp, cynical woman named Ms. Janice Keller, attempted damage control, arguing that the video was tampered with and the antique shop's back room was simply used for large, aggressive rescue dogs. "Where is this supposed Rottweiler Mastiff detective?" Keller challenged, her voice dripping with skepticism. "If this was a trafficking operation, why didn't the officers find the animal?" Reynolds met her gaze steadily. "They were warned, Ms. Keller. They were moved. But we have DNA, blood, and the anesthetic traces." The prosecution then called the most crucial, yet most vulnerable, witness, Leo Sterling. Leo entered the courtroom, clutching the hand of Ms. Olivia Hayes, the Child Protective Services, CPS, worker assigned to his case. Hayes was a woman in her late 40s, African-American, with a warm, steady presence and kind, intelligent eyes. She was wearing a simple, practical navy blazer, and her demeanor was a blend of professional calm and genuine maternal concern. Her primary goal was to ensure Leo's stability, not the conviction, a fact that made her an unusually compelling presence in the harsh legal environment. Leo, small and frail in a neatly pressed jacket, approached the witness stand, but his gaze immediately swept the room, searching. His face, still haunted by the months of terror, paled visibly when his eyes landed on Vivi. The systematic fear, instilled by months of training, slammed back into him. He reached the stand and froze, his body rigid. "Leo, sweetheart, can you tell the court what happened?" asked the prosecutor, Paul Merrick. Leo could not speak. The silence in the courtroom stretched, agonizing and heavy. His eyes glazed over, fixed on the memory of the snarling dog and the relentless burn of the iron. Seeing the boy regress, Eli, who had been waiting patiently near the prosecutor's bench, took a bold step. He approached the bench and requested an immediate, extraordinary accommodation from the judge, Judge Eleanor Vance. Judge Vance, no relation to Eli, but a woman known for her thoughtful compassion and strict legal adherence, surveyed the scene: the terrified child, the composed defendant, the desperate prosecutor. "Officer Vance, approach the bench," she ordered, her voice grave. Eli whispered his request, confirming it was the only way to ground the child. Judge Vance considered the unprecedented nature of the request, then nodded slowly. "Granted, but make it swift, officer." Eli returned to the gallery and gave a subtle hand signal. The doors at the back of the courtroom opened, and Kaiser entered. The German shepherd, calm and majestic, moved with the quiet dignity of a true service animal. He wore no muzzle, only his working harness, and his amber eyes scanned the room, settling instantly on Eli. The dog's presence immediately caused a stir, the press murmuring and the defense counsel objecting vehemently. Eli led Kaiser directly to the witness stand, stopping just below Leo. "He's an anchor, Your Honor," Eli stated, his voice loud enough for the court. Eli knelt, gently addressing Leo. "Leo, this is Kaiser. He's my partner. He's here because he trusts me, and I trust him." Eli then did the unexpected. He gently took the boy's small, trembling hand and placed it on the thick, warm fur covering Kaiser's neck. The effect was instantaneous and profound. The instant Leo's fingers connected with the silent, powerful animal, the paralysis broke. The cold, systematic fear did not vanish, but it was countered by an equally powerful force. The warmth and weight of a dog he knew was loyal to the gentle man beside him. Leo squeezed his eyes shut, his entire focus concentrated on the thick coat beneath his fingers. He took a deep, shuddering breath. When he opened his eyes, he was still afraid, but he found his voice. She told me to be silent," Leo whispered, his voice gaining strength. "She used the dog and the steam, but when I came to the hospital, the big dog, the mean one, was gone." "Did Ms. Thorne tell you where that dog went, Leo?" the prosecutor asked gently. Leo shook his head, still clutching Kaiser. "She told me she sold him, that morning. She sold him fast to a man who flew in on a private plane. She said he was too valuable to lose, and she needed the money." The courtroom exploded in murmurs. The defense's strongest argument, the missing dog, had just been obliterated by the child witness, who provided the motive for its disappearance. The dog was too valuable to risk losing as evidence, confirming the organized trafficking operation. Ms. Keller rose again, sharp and desperate. "Objection! Hearsay! And what about the iron, Leo? Did you burn yourself?" Leo looked directly at Vivi, a flicker of courage replacing the terror. "No, the iron was for when I cried. The mean dog was for when I talked." The court had heard enough. Eli gently guided Kaiser away from the stand as Leo, exhausted but resolute, stepped down. The defense's narrative was destroyed. Vivi had sold the evidence, confirming the scale and cynical nature of her operation. The stage was set for the final judgment. The gavel's final, heavy strike echoed in the silent courtroom, sealing Vivian Thorne's fate. The jury's verdict, guilty on all counts, had landed like a physical blow, stripping away the last vestiges of Vivi's composure. As Judge Eleanor Vance delivered the harsh, commensurate sentence, Vivi's face, usually so controlled, dissolved into a silent, venomous mask of defeat. The system had, finally, protected the vulnerable. Outside the courtroom, the scene was one of exhausted relief. Eli Vance stood with Detective Grant Reynolds and Ms. Olivia Hayes, the CPS worker. The immediate justice was gratifying, but the hard work of healing was just beginning. Later that afternoon, Eli and Reynolds met Evan Sterling one last time. Evan was a ghost of the man who had walked into the precinct days earlier. The guilt of his blindness and subsequent manipulation had been absolute. He sat alone in the small conference room, the bare space on his ring finger now a permanent symbol of his failure. "She used me," Evan whispered, his voice thick with tears and shame. "I let her kill Clara and hurt my son because I was too broken to see the truth right in front of me." Reynolds pushed a document across the table. It was a formal termination of parental rights, an act that would allow Leo to move into a secure, permanent home. Evan didn't hesitate. He picked up the pen, his thick, scarred fingers steady now, only in this final act of atonement. "I don't deserve him," Evan said, signing the papers with a decisive, painful flourish. "He deserves better than a father who couldn't protect him. Grace will protect him." Grace Bennett was Evan's older sister and Leo's paternal aunt, the woman the outline had always been working toward. She arrived at the courthouse wrapped in a quiet dignity that seemed to instantly settle the chaos around her. Grace was in her early 50s, a woman with a comfortable, round face, silver threads woven through her thick brown hair, and the kind of deep, knowing blue eyes that missed nothing but judged little. She had the steady, warm hands of a woman who spent her life tending to something, be it a garden, a library, or a troubled child. Grace was a librarian in a small Georgia town, known for her patience and her unwavering belief in the power of second chances. "I need stability," Grace told Eli, her voice calm and firm. "Not pity. He needs routine. He needs to know that when someone promises safety, they keep that promise." Leo, still pale but visibly lighter after the trial, was formally placed in Grace's custody. The change was immediate. Grace's house was warm, filled with the scent of old paper and freshly baked bread, a sensory opposite of the cold, chemical dread of the restoration shop. However, the deep-seated terror remained. Leo was healing physically, but the fear of large dogs, the lasting evidence of Vivi's systematic desensitization training, still plagued him. Knowing this, Grace took a profound step, one that Eli understood perfectly. A few weeks after the sentencing, Grace welcomed a new member into their small household, Gus, a massive 10-year-old golden retriever. Gus was everything Kaiser was not. He was retired, slow-moving, perpetually sleepy, and utterly devoid of aggression. His coat was the color of faded gold, his muzzle was gray with age, and his tail rarely stopped the gentle, rhythmic thump against the floor. Gus was a certified therapy dog, used to the quiet trauma of frightened humans. Grace introduced them slowly. "Leo, this is Gus. He's very old. He moves slowly. He needs you to take care of him, not the other way around." Leo would stand stiffly, watching the gentle giant, his fear a visceral, tight knot in his stomach. But Gus never moved without permission, never barked, only offered the quiet, reassuring weight of his head against the boy's knee. That profound, silent patience of the old golden slowly began to chip away at the terror the Rottweiler Mastiff had instilled. The warmth of Gus's fur, unlike the cold, hard steel of the kennel, was unconditional and voluntary. Meanwhile, the site of the crime was being redeemed. The Savannah Relic Restoration, now officially seized assets, was purchased by a community foundation led by activists and animal welfare advocates. The transformation was swift and symbolic. The building was completely gutted, the soundproof room dismantled, and the walls repainted a soft, hopeful blue. The business reopened 6 months later as the Safe Harbor, a nonprofit rescue and community center dedicated to giving second chances to both children and abused working animals. Eli and Kaiser became frequent, unofficial visitors. Kaiser, now a celebrity in the Savannah community, would patrol the center, his presence radiating quiet confidence. Eli would spend his off hours helping to rehabilitate rescue dogs. The first time Leo came to the Safe Harbor, he walked straight to the center of the old workshop floor, now a clean, brightly lit playroom, and showed no fear. Gus trotted happily beside him. Leo, now 8, was thriving under Grace's patient care. He was still quiet, but his eyes were bright, his shoulders relaxed. He often watched Eli work with the new intake of rescue dogs, some of them large, powerful breeds that reminded Eli of the beast Vivi had used. One afternoon, Leo approached Eli as he worked with a timid, scarred German Shepherd pup, a dog that was the inverse of Kaiser. "Officer Vance?" Leo asked, his voice steady. Eli knelt, Kaiser immediately resting his heavy head on Eli's shoulder. "Yes, Leo?" Leo looked from Kaiser's amber eyes to Eli's kind, steady gaze. He reached out, not to Kaiser, but to the pup Eli was holding, giving it a gentle, confident scratch behind the ears. "When I grow up," Leo said, the promise ringing clear and true against the newly painted walls, "I want to be a K-9 officer. I want a dog like Kaiser. I want to show the scared ones that the good dogs are stronger than the mean ones." Eli smiled, a rare, genuine expression that transformed his guarded face. He looked at the vast, sun-filled room, the center that had replaced the cruelty, the boy who had replaced silence with courage, and the dog who had taught them both the meaning of loyalty. Justice had been served in the cold courtroom, but true redemption, Eli realized, always happened in the quiet rooms of second chances. The story of Eli Vance, Kaiser, and little Leo Sterling reminds us that justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it arrives in a whisper, guided by the faithful paws of a dog and the steady hands of a kind heart. We saw evil reduced to a cold, hard sentence, but we also witnessed true redemption bloom in the quiet chaos of a second chance. Leo's healing, Gus's gentle presence, and the transformation of a soundproof room into the Safe Harbor are not just happy endings. They are proof that God sends his miracles, not always with a flash of light, but through the small, consistent acts of grace. In our own lives, that miracle can begin with you. It starts with listening to a child's silent cry, as Lena Chavez did, or simply offering the steady warmth that Grace Bennett brought to Leo. Every time we choose compassion over turning away, every time we lend our voice to the vulnerable, we are actively participating in the miracle of restoration. If this story of a boy who learned that not all power is cruel, and that the strongest dog is the one who chooses loyalty, if this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs a reminder that faith and kindness still change lives. Drop an amen in the comments below to bless the hearts still searching for their safe harbor. Hit subscribe so you never miss the next true story of courage and hope. May God bless you, and may His protection be with every heart that believes in the quiet miracle of a second chance.